8.
Captain Dumont had always imagined heaven as a place of light, a place where darkness could never invade. He would have never thought that heaven could be a realm where shadow preserved and even the light of dawn could mean death. Of course, heaven to him was any place where he could be with Atana. He had left her some hours before, but still, she had his heart and mind. Kentrell had only slept lightly since, yet he felt refreshed, more alive than ever in his entire life. He peered out of the window of the room given to him to see the city still alive with torches. Although a part of him yearned for some bit of daylight, simply in order to mark the passage of time, the captain knew that could not be. Until the people of Ureh could safely stand in the sun, the shadow had to remain fixed over the kingdom. Katana felt certain that her father could remedy the situation now that they had some stability on the mortal plane. However, to accomplish anything, he first had to be free, and only through, quoth, sin could that be possible. Never before had Cantrell looked at the Vizeri for any true magical assistance. He had desired some, yes, during the battle with the demon cat, but had not actually expected much. Now, he prayed that Sin would prove himself the master he claimed to be.
Control.
Gore stood at the doorway to his chambers, the massive fighter at attention. Cantrell blinked, recalling that each morning he generally received a status report from his second. Of course, with their work for Sin seemingly at an end, the captain had put all such tasks from his mind. Only Khan's daughter concerned him now. Yes, Gorst?
3 missing. Control.
Missing?
7 came back
He grinned.
drunk. 3 didn't.
Captain Dumont shrugged. Not too surprising, all things considered. Actually, I'm amazed that so many returned.
Want me to watch for them?
Not unless they go missing for a couple days. We're all being treated like kings here. They're just reveling in it, and that's all. The black maned fighter started to turn away, then commented,
She's prettier than on the brooch. Control.
I know, Gorst. Any word from Sin on his efforts? If any of them had kept track of the Vizeri's work, it would have been the huge mercenary.
The magic man thinks he's got something.
That pleased Kentrell. Good. Where can I find him?
With the books.
When it became clear that his captain did not understand, Gorst grunted.
I'll show you.
Kentrell followed him through a maze of halls until they came to what surely had to be one of the largest collections of writings the mercenary had ever either heard of or seen. While he could read and write after a fashion, not something most men could do, Kentrell could not imagine himself putting together so many words. Moreover, the words in these tomes and scrolls not only had meaning, but power. These words had magic. Shelves rose high, each filled with leather-bound volumes or tightly sealed parchments. No direct system of order could be seen, but as a military man, Captain Dumont assumed that there had to be one. Well-worn ladders stood before every other set of shelves. The tables, with stools, had been set aside for those making use of Ureh's literary treasures. As a mercenary, Kentrell could also appreciate the value of the many writings stored in this vast chamber. Sorceresses like Wolfson often paid hefty prices for such books, and he himself had retrieved one or two for good pay. Still, at the moment, all Kentrell saw in the library was the means by which Atana could be free. No, he saw something else besides. Seated in the midst of the lamp-lit chamber, Wolfson huddled over books and sheets, scribbling notes with a quill and keeping his index finger on one of the pages of one particularly massive tome. Ureh did not look up as Kentrell neared. Under his breath, Sin muttered incomprehensible things, and the sorcerer had a look upon his wrinkled features that caused the hardened fighter to pause. He had seen the diminutive Ureh obsessed before, but now Sin resembled a man gone completely mad. His eyes never blinked as he worked, and his gaze went only from the book to the sheet upon which he wrote and back again. A grin that the captain had only seen on corpses stretched far across the slight figure's face, giving Sin a very unsettling expression. Churl cleared his throat. The stooped figure did not look up, instead scrawling new notes over the already heavily covered parchment. Sin, with what almost seemed a monumental struggle, the avian face turned its way. What is it, Dumont? The venom with which the Ureh spoke each syllable left both Kentrell and Gorse taken aback. The captain realized that his hand had slipped to the hilt of his sword, and he quickly removed it before Sin could take any further umbrage. I came to see how you were progressing with Lord Khan and the cities. I could be progressing much faster without constant and innate interruptions by the likes of you, cretin. Wolfson slammed his fist on the table, sending ink spreading across the bottom of the parchment and over his hand. He seemed not to notice what he had done, more concerned with spitting barbed words at those before him. You come crawling and squeaking and questioning, all of you, when I sit here on the verge of discovery. Can your feeble minds not comprehend the magnitude of what I struggle toward? Releasing the quill, the ink-stained hand reached for the sorcerer's staff. Malice filled Sin's eyes. Kentrell backed up more, nearly colliding with Gorse. Easy there, Sin. Are you insane? Knuckles white, the Ureh clutched the staff. His silver-gray eyes darted from the tomb into the rune-covered rod and back again. For a few dangerous seconds, a struggle between choices clearly unfolded, and then at last Wolfson put the staff to the side, and with much effort turned back to his task. Without looking at the pair, he whispered, "You had better leave. Sin, I think you need some rest. And when was the last time you ate any?" Both of the spellcaster's bony hands tightened. Eyes still downcast, he said again, "You had better leave." Gorse took Kentrell by the shoulder, and the two backed out of the library. They said nothing until several steps down the corridor, where they hoped Sin could not hear them. "Was he like that the last time you saw him?" Captain Dumont interrogated his second.
No, not so bad anyways, Kentrell.
"I knew the old mage was ill-tempered. Sin nearly tried to kill us, you know that, don't you?" The giant gave him a brooding look.
I know.
"I should go have a talk with Juriscon. It won't do anyone any good if old Sin goes violently mad. He might hurt someone."
Maybe he just needs to take a nap.
Kentrell grimaced. "Well, if anyone could make him do it, it'd have to be Khan. You saw how much he listened to me."
You want me to keep an eye on him?
Gorse asked. "Only if you keep your distance. Don't do it immediately, though. Let him get lost in his work again for an hour or two. That might be better." From somewhere within the palace, a flute began to play. Suddenly, Kentrell lost all interest in the damnable Bajari's antics. He knew of only one person in Khan's sanctum who played a flute. "Maybe if I talk to Atana first, she can better explain it to her father," the captain could not help saying. "That'd probably be the best course of action for me." The grin returned to Gorse's broad face.
Probably be.
Kentrell felt his face flush. He turned to go, but could not help but adding at last, "Just be careful, Gorse." The grin remained.
You too.
The flute playing continued, the same haunting melody that he had heard the first fateful time. Captain Dumont followed the music through numerous winding halls that made it feel to him as if he were repeating his journey to the library. At last, Kentrell came not to a balcony or one of the many vast chambers, but rather to an open gate leading to, of all things, a vast inner courtyard open to the sky. A courtyard doubling as an extensive garden. Garden, perhaps, understated severely the sight. A miniature forest, more a jungle, spread out before the veteran soldier. Exotic trees and plants that seemed like none Kentrell had ever encountered, not even on the trek to this distant part of Kyrgyzstan. Grew tall and strong, dark greens, vivid crimsons, bright yellows, and fiery oranges decorated the tableau in an arresting fashion. There were hanging vine plants and monstrous flowers, some of the latter larger than his head. One could literally become lost within a garden such as this. Of that, Kentrel had no doubt. And, near the path leading into it, Atana, seated on a stone bench, played her flute. A billowing, silky dress with a long, thin skirt somehow emphasized rather than hid her slim but curved form. Her long red tresses hung down over the left side of her face, reaching all the way to a most attractive décolletage. She did not notice him at first, but when he started toward her, captivated by the sight of her playing, Atana suddenly looked up. Her eyes held such an intensity that they left Kentrel at a loss for how to proceed. Atana, however, took control of the situation by putting down her flute and coming to him.
Control. I hope you slept well.
Very much. You play beautifully, Atana. She gave him a most demure look.
I think not. But my father seems to share your opinion.
Not certain what to say yet. The captain glanced past her at the garden. One never knows what to expect next here.
Do you like it? This is my favorite place. I've spent much of my life here, and much of our exile, too.
It's unique. Atana pulled him toward it.
You must have a closer look.
Despite the fanciful colors of the flowers and some of the plants, the garden had a rather foreboding look that Kentrel did not truly notice until his hostess had led him up to the path running through it. Suddenly, the beauty and wonder of it gave way to an uneasiness. Now it reminded him more of the jungle through which he and his men had fought, the same jungle that had claimed four of his party.
What's the matter?
Juris Khan's daughter asked. Nothing. He steeled himself for the walk through. This was not the same stark jungle. This was simply a fanciful garden built for the lord of the realm. What danger could possibly exist within such a confined space?
I love it here.
She murmured.
It takes me away. Away from the world in which I'm trapped. Lets me imagine I'm far away in another land, about to meet a handsome stranger.
Kentrel started to say something, but decided he could not trust his tongue not to tie itself up. He could scarcely believe himself. Never in his life had any woman left him feeling so befuddled. Broad-leafed plants brushed their shoulders, and occasional vines, seeming to drop from nowhere, dangled near their heads. The path at their feet had been made to seem quite natural, a covering of soft dirt and sand over what felt like solid stone. With each step, though, it grew darker and darker, until at last he could see neither the entrance through which they had come, nor the exit far ahead. Now, he truly felt as if he had stepped back into the jungle. His companion noticed his sudden anxiety.
You're shivering.
It's nothing, my lady.
You're supposed to call me Atana.
She responded in mock anger.
Or did this mean so little to you?
She leaned forward and kissed him. His anxieties concerning his surroundings vanished in an instant. Kentrell wrapped his arms around her and returned their passion. Then, he felt something on his neck. A slow but steady movement, like that of a worm or a caterpillar. Yet, whatever crawled upon his skin did so with appendages sharp as needles. Unable to withstand it, Captain Dumont pushed the Tana back and quickly reached for the creature. However, as his hand neared, the thing suddenly pulled away, as if perhaps falling off.
What is it?
Atana cautiously asked. Something landed on me. Felt as if it walked across my neck with tiny swords at each end of the leg. Even in the darkness, he could make out her face well enough. Atana frowned in consideration, but seemed to have no knowledge to offer.
Shall we leave?
The pain had faded, and Kentrell had no desire to look cowardly and foolish before her, especially over some insect. No, let's go on as we have. They moved on a few paces, stopping again to kiss. Atana then buried his head on his shoulders, saying,
Father still hopes to complete the journey to heaven.
He stiffened. Is that still possible?
So he believes. I pray he's wrong.
But why? She put a hand on his cheek.
Because I find the mortal world more to my liking.
Can you talk him out of it? The gentle caress of her hand against his skin helped Kentrell relax again.
Would help if I knew that we stood an easier and safer chance of making our tentative hold on the mortal plane, a permanent one. If I could convince Father that, for the sake of all, we would be better off once more among men, then I feel he'd acquiesce. After all, the threat we fled no longer exists.
She wanted to stay, and he wanted her to stay. Yet Juriscon wished at last to achieve the holy goal offered to him during those dark years of terror. Not surprising, but certainly not wanted by either here. Maybe Sin would know. Kentrell started before recalling the possession the Bajeri seemed under. He did not want to try to speak with Sin, at least not until the sorcerer had been persuaded to rest and eat properly.
Maybe he could convince Father.
Her tone spoke openly of hope.
You think he could do it? The old one seems very skilled, if lacking in common courtesy.
I don't... The captain paused. An idea began to formulate, one that would possibly play on old Sin's personality. Atana appeared to sense the shifting mood.
You've thought of something, haven't you?
A possible idea. If Sin remains constant, it could work to your benefit. I need to think about it a little longer, and it'd be good if I didn't talk to him just now.
I have no intention of parting with you just yet anyway.
The young woman responded.
Not at the moment.
Atana stepped up and kissed him again. Feeling much better about matters, Captain Dumont responded in kind. If the Vajera could be persuaded to see, all Kentrell had to do was play on the spellcaster's greed. He let out a gasp of pain. Ow! Something dug into his back as if trying to reach all the way into his heart. He twisted around, felt what seemed like one of the vines, and swiftly grabbed it. What felt like 1,000 pins sank into his fingers and palm.
Control!
Despite his agony, the mercenary kept his hold, then tugged with all his might. A peculiar and not at all human squeal coursed through the garden. The entire vine tumbled to the path, a dark, sinewy form more than 3 times the length of a man. Throwing the end down, Kentrell clutched the hand that had held the plant with his other. It felt as if he had stuck the throbbing appendage into an open fire. Atana! What was...
I have no idea. Your hand. Give me your hand.
Her soft fingers lightly touched his own. The pain receded. Atana whispered something, then leaned down and let her lips lightly touch his palm. Fearful of her suffering from whatever plant poison had gotten him, the captain tried to pull away. With surprising strength, however, Juris Khan's daughter held on.
Please, Kentrell, rest easy. I know what I'm about.
It seemed that she did, for the more she worked at his injury, the less and less it hurt him. Before long, he could even flex the fingers without feeling so much as a twinge. What did you do? He finally asked.
I am my father's daughter.
Was her reply.
I am the daughter of the most revered, Juris Khan.
Meaning that she shared some of his wondrous skills. Caught up in her glory, he had forgotten that she had such talents. Now that Atana had dealt with his injury, he recalled what had attacked him in the first place. Squinting, Kentrell searched the dark path for the end of the vine. His companion found it first.
Were you looking for this?
Be careful. But she looked unaffected by the vile plant.
This could not be what stung you. This is only a Hakara vine. In some parts of the world, they eat the fleshy bottom part. It has much juice and is claimed to be healthy.
That spiny thing? He took it from her, only to find it smooth and soft, save for a few tiny bumps. Frustrated, Kentrell ran his hands along the length of the vine, finding nothing out of the ordinary.
You must have been bitten by an insect of some sort. Probably the same one that bothered you before.
Katana suggested.
Sometimes, some of the jungle insects used to make their way up to the city, despite how the mountain causes the air here to be cooler than they like.
An insect? In Ureh?
And why not? You and your friends are here. Why not an insect that happened to be near? The jungle isn't that far from the edge of our kingdom.
Her words made sense, but did not completely mollify him. He looked around the darkened garden, finally saying, "Let's move on." Only when the first glimmer of light at the end materialized did Kentrell feel any calmer. As they exited, he looked back with barely concealed distaste. Atana and others in Ureh might find such a grove peaceful and beautiful, but to the soldier, it seemed more in tune with the nightmarish curse Gregus Mossy had wrought. Had the timeless exile in Limbo somehow changed the plans in ways that Khan's daughter did not notice?
Now that we've got better light,
Atana suddenly said.
let me see your hand again.
He turned it over for both of them to study, and saw little more than a few healing welts. Kentrell could scarcely believe it, having felt as if his entire hand should be a bloody, preparated mess. Running her finger over the remaining marks, the young woman commented,
In short time, these two will vanish.
"It's amazing. Thank you." He had witnessed magic before, but never had it ever been performed on him. Kentrell felt certain that if Atana had not used her skills, he would have been much worse at this moment.
It's only a small thing, and I feel bad that you suffered because of me. If I hadn't invited you to walk with me...
Such things happen. Don't blame yourself. She looked up at him with imploring eyes.
Will you still talk to Master Sin about trying to get Father to change his mind?
Of course I will. How could Atana think otherwise? The captain did this as much for himself as for her. Old Sin's consistent. I'll explain the matter to his liking. He'll be certain to do what he can to make Lord Khan see it right, too.
I hope so.
She kissed him again.
And thinking of my father, I must go to him now. Since he cannot move from the chair, I must play for him to ease his burdens. Perhaps I can even make a mild suggestion already. He's always more agreeable after my music.
With one final kiss, Atana left him, her slim form disappearing into the garden. Kentril watched her vanish, but although the garden would have likewise been an appropriate route for him, the mercenary did not enter. Instead, he walked around the perimeter, keeping a cautious distance. By the time Kentril reached where Khan's daughter had been playing, both she and the flute had long left. Alone, Captain Dumont took one last measured look at the unsettling grove. At first glance, it seemed no more unusual than any patch of jungle or forest, and as a place specifically sculpted by some master gardener, it should have presented an even less intimidating image than either of the former. Yet the more he studied it, the more Kentril felt that if he had entered it alone, it would have been much more difficult to come out. From behind him, someone cleared his throat. Captain? Albor! He hoped that the other mercenary had not noticed him jump ever so slightly. What is it? Sorry to bother you, but a couple of us were wondering when we might get our reward from his lordship, so we can get going home. You're already tired of all the acclamation, Albor? The plain-faced, white-haired fighter looked a bit uncomfortable. Kentril forgot that, despite his experience and skills, Albert was much younger than most of those in the company, that he had often been left in charge when Gorse could not be spared had said much for his abilities. It's not that I had a good time as any captain, but a few of us want to know when we're going to head back to Westmarch. He shrugged. Just feel a bit more comfortable at home than here, sir. The last thing that Kentril wanted was to leave, but he could understand how the others might feel. Gorst would probably stay. He had no family, no kin. The rest, though, had ties to the Western Kingdom, even loved ones. That these men served as mercenaries had as much to do with feeding mouths as with becoming rich. All thought of the garden fading. The captain patted Albert on the shoulder. I'll see what I can do about being done is stop sending a lot of you home. If I do, can I trust you to bring something back to the family of those lost? If I read our good host right, one small sack should have enough to split among the survivors and leave them well off. Aye, Captain. You know I'll be honest. Kentril had no doubt about that. He also knew which other men from the survivors could be cut from similar cloth. No one joined Captain Dumont's company who did not first undergo thorough scrutiny. If Kentril sent Albert home with coin for those left behind by Benjamin, Hargo, and the others, it would reach them. Grateful, the younger fighter saluted. He started to step away, then hesitated. Captain, 2 men still haven't come back from the city. I know. Gorse told me 3, actually. Simon dragged himself in just a little while ago, but he said Jace was heading back hours before, and no one's seen sign of Breck. Having known far too many men like the pair missing, Kentril shrugged off Albert's concern. They'll pop off, you'll see. They won't want to miss their share, remember? Should I send someone out to look? Not now. The captain became a little impatient. He needed to take some time to think about how best to phrase things so that Sin would readily see his point of view. Kendrill had no more time to waste on drunken mercenaries gone astray. I told Gorst already that if they don't show up in a couple days, maybe then. Hoping he had not sounded too uncaring, Captain Dumont patted Albert's shoulder again. Try to relax. Enjoy this. Believe me, Albert, it happens all too little for those like us. The jungle we crossed, or that winter near the Gulf of Westmarch, that's our usual payoff. Albert gave him a plowboy smile, reminding Kentrell of the background of almost every low-paid mercenary ever born. I suppose I could take the food and women a little longer. That's the spirit, the older fighter proclaimed as he began guiding the other back down the hall. In his mind, Kentrell pictured Atana, his own reason for staying, perhaps forever. At least until he had talked to Bajura and persuading Juris Khan no longer to seek the righteous path to heaven, the captain did not want to broach the subject of payment. It was not as if Albert and the others were not being rewarded in other ways. Besides, Kendrill thought, what harm could a few more days waiting do? The perpetual shadow over Ureh worked in Zail's favor as he climbed toward Gregus Matsi's mountain sanctum. Even though the former monastery faced away from much of the city below, enough of a line of sight existed that would have made it quite simple in daylight for anyone to spot the cloaked form winding its way up the half-broken path carved into the rock face. Zail could appreciate the location the sorcerer had chosen, and wondered why he had never noticed the ruins of it earlier. The spell that had taken a spirit form of Ureh and cast it heavenward had interesting touches to it that he hoped later to investigate. Below him, the celebrating continued unabated. Zail frowned. Do the people require no sleep? True, the realm of Limbo did not fall under the same laws as the mortal plane, but surely by now, exhaustion should have taken many of the inhabitants. Huge, ominous forms stood guard as he at last reached what passed for a gateway to the monastery. Once there had been archangels with majestic blazing swords and massive outstretched wings, but like their counterparts on the doors of Khan's palace, these had been heavily damaged. One angel missed an entire wing and the right side of its face. The other had no head at all, and only stubs where the once magnificent plumed appendages had risen. Zael crawled over rubble, finding it interesting that Gregis Mati's abode remained so ruined when all else in Ureh had been restored to new. The necromancer could only assume that the people of the cursed city had taken out their anger at some point on the abode of their absent tormentor. Zael only hoped that this did not mean that Mati's sanctum had been ransacked. He wished again that he knew more about the ways of the realm in which Ureh had been trapped. Khan hinted that a semblance of the passage of time did exist, for had he not talked of researching a method of escape during those centuries of imprisonment? Yet it seemed that no one had needed to eat, for certainly the food could not have lasted very long. What remained of the monastery itself did not initially impress Zael. Thrust out of the very side of the mountain, the unassuming outline indicated only a two-story block design structure that could have held more than two rooms to a level. A small balcony overlooked all below, and only a low wall pretended to give any protection whatsoever to the place. Despite some disappointment in what he had found so far, the necromancer continued on. At the base of the building, he found a plain wooden door, the likes of which might have decorated a simple country inn. His eyesight far better suited to the dark than most humans, Zael made out damage on every side of the doorway. Someone had used axes and clubs to batter every inch of the stone frame, almost as if in absolute frustration. Oddly, though, the door itself looked absolutely untouched. It took only the placing of his hand on the wood to discover why. A complex series of protective spells crisscrossed all over, making the door itself virtually impenetrable, not only to physical attack, but even to many forms of magical assault. The stone frame, which had suffered some superficial cracks, also had spells cast over it, but those fell older, as if not laid upon quicker by its last and most infamous tenant. Zael's estimate of the monastery as a place for a sorcerer to live rose. The monks who had built it had evidently strengthened it through some very powerful prayers, if even after all this time most of the wards held. Looking up, the necromancer found no visible windows. In one place, it appeared as if there had once been a window, but in the past it had been covered up quite thoroughly with stone. Zael assumed that if he climbed up and investigated it, he would find the former opening as well shielded as the entrance. That left only the door as a way inside. The pale spellcaster touched it again, sensing the myriad binding Gregis Matsi had set into place to ensure the safety of his sanctum. The ancient sorcerer had clearly been very adept at his art. Zael pulled Hombart's skull free. Tell me, what do you see? Besides the door, you mean? You know what I want from you. He thrust the skull closer to the entrance, letting it survey everything. After a few moments, Humbart said, "There's lines all over here, boy. Some good strong magic here. and not at all by one person. Most of it is, but there's underlining lines that had to have been from two, even three, even some prayer work too. One interesting feature concerning the skull that the necromancer had discovered after animating it had been that the spirit of Humbart Wessel could now see the workings of magic in ways no living spellcaster could. Zael had no references upon which to draw for a reason for this ability, and could only assume that the many centuries of having lain near the ruins of Ureh had somehow changed the skull. Over the past few years, the talent had come in quite handy, saving Zael hours, even days of painstaking work. With his other hand, the black-clad figure removed the ivory dagger. Hilt held up, he asked Humbart, "Where do most intersect?" "Down to the left, boy. Waist level. No, not there. More to the right. Stop." Pointing the hilt at the spot the skull had indicated, Zael muttered under his breath. The dagger began to glow. Suddenly, a multicolored pattern reminiscent of the hexagon within a flower burst into existence at the point specified. Still whispering, Zael thrust the hilt into the exact center, at the same time turning the end of the dagger in a circular motion. The magical pattern flashed bright, then instantly faded away. You cleared much of it, lad. There's still a little locking to do, though. With Humbart's fleshless head to guide him, Zael gradually removed the last impediments. Had he been forced to rely on his own skills alone, he doubted that he would have had such quick success. The words had been skillfully woven together. However, one advantage the necromancer had discovered had been that the most cunning had been set to guard against demons, not men. Questioning the skull revealed that the majority of those had been created more recently, which likely pointed to Gregus Matsi as their caster. You can walk right in now, Humbart finally announced. The skull in the nook of one arm and the dagger now held ready for more mundane use. Zael stepped inside. A darkened hall greeted him. The necromancer muttered a word, and the blade of the dagger began to glow. Zael had thought Matsi's sanctum rather small, but now he saw he had been sorely mistaken. The empty hall led deep into the mountainside, so deep that he could not even see the end. To his left, a set of winding steps obviously led to the more visible portion of the structure, though Zael only had interest in where the corridor ahead ended. True, he might have been able to find what he needed in the outer rooms, but the spellcaster's curiosity had been piqued. What secrets had Gregus Matsi left behind? With the dagger lighting the way, Zael headed down the hall. The walls had been patiently carved from bedrock, then polished fine. However, the same monks who had no doubt performed the back-breaking work had not been bothered much with adornment. Now and then the fluttering figure of an armed archangel pointed farther ahead, But other than that, neither the monks nor Matsi had bothered to decorate further. Zael paused at the third such image, so lovingly carved, suddenly noticing something about it. Humbart, still in his arm, grew impatient. I'm staring at a blank wall inches from where my nose used to be, Zael. Lad, is there anything more interesting above? The cloaked figure raised the skull so that his dead companion could see. It is untouched. And that would mean... Think about it, Humbart. The doors of the palace, the archangels at the gateway leading here, all purposely damaged, as if by those who hated such holy images. And so, moving to the next angel, Zael saw that it, too, remained in pristine condition. Why would so corrupt a mage as Gregus Mossi has been claimed to be leave these untouched? Maybe he didn't want to make a mess in his own good home. This means something, Humbart. But what it meant exactly, the necromancer did not know. He pushed on, glancing at some of the other heavenly guides, yet none had more than a slight weathered look to it. No, Mossi had not wreaked harm on any of those images within his own abode, and that made no sense to Zael. They came at last across the first rooms actually carved into the mountain. Rooms the last tenant had clearly not bothered much to use. Little remained of any furnishings. A few very old beds sat lonely in the far corners of some, the wood slowly rotting away. Some had already collapsed. Old Gregus never struck me as a sociable sort, Humbart commented quietly. Looks like that was the truth. Can't think he had too many visitors here. After several more such rooms, Zael at last came across a set of stone steps leading down. Unable to see the bottom, the necromancer proceeded with even more caution, the dagger ahead of him and a spell upon his lips. Fortunately, no trap or demon struck. At the end of the stairway, he found a short corridor ending in 3 closed doors, one in front of the others flanking him. A quick study revealed all to be identical, and when Zael had the skull look them over, Humbart informed him that none of them had any sort of ward in place. I'm reminded of a story about an adventurer, the skull went on while the necromancer considered his choice. He came across 3 such doors. Now, he had been told that 2 doors led to treasure and escape, while the third held certain horrible death. While the lad gave it some thought, listened at the doors, and finally made his choice. Zael, just on the point of picking the one to his left, noticed Humbart's sudden silence. And so, what happened? Why, he opened one and got himself eaten alive by a pack of ghouls, of course. As it turns out, none of the doors led to gold or safety, and all of them, in fact, had monstrous, grisly ends waiting for those who... Shut up, Humbart. Even though the skull had not seen any wards, Zael did not assume the entranceways were free of risk. Placing his unliving companion back in the pouch, he readied himself for any trap his opening the first door might spring. A vast chamber full of dust and nothing more greeted him. Are you eaten yet? came Humbart's muffled voice. The necromancer grimaced. Gregis Matsi might have taken over what had been left of the old monastery, but he had not made much use of it. Perhaps, Zael thought, he would have been better off searching through the outer rooms first after all. Looking at the remaining two doors, he chose the first of the pair. Surely the door faced by Eddie, who came down the steps, had to be the one. Steeling himself against Zael pushed it open. Row upon row of half-rotted tables spread out before him, and a looming archangel with one hand held forward in blessing seemed to reach out from the wall on the far side. Zael swore under his breath, realizing that he had found where the monks had met for their meals. From the looks of everything, it was yet another chamber not bothered much with the late Matsi. With little fanfare, he turned about and headed directly for one entrance left. Thrusting the glowing dagger before him, Zael barged in. An array of glassware and arcane objects greeted him from every direction, even the ceiling. Zael paused to drink it all in. Here now the world of Gregis Matsi began. Here, displayed before the necromancer, was the workplace of a man of intense interest in every aspect of his calling. With one sweep of the illuminated blade, Zael saw jars filled with herbs of every kind, pickled and preserved creatures the likes of which even the necromancer could not identify, and chemicals by the scores, in both powder and liquid form. There were racks of books and scrolls, open parchments with notes, and drawings atop of some of the tables, and even artifacts hung by chains from certain parts of the ceiling. Everything had a polished appearance to it, making it seem as if it had been only yesterday that the sorcerer had been at work here. The point, in fact, Zael realized for this sanctum, it had only been a few days at most. The peculiarities of Limbo had once again preserved history. It must be very interesting out there, I suppose. Humbart called. Pulling the skull free, the necromancer placed it on the main table next to where Mozzie had been making notes. Holding the dagger near, Zael looked over the writing. What is it? Spell patterns. Theoretical outcomes. This Gregis Mozzie was a practical thinker. The necromancer frowned. Not what I would have expected of him. Evil can be very clever, if that's what you mean, lad. Zael studied the parchment in more detail. Yes, but all these notes concern only how to make the ascension to heaven possible. It is written as if by someone who truly believes in the quest. Giving the parchment one more glance, the necromancer turned to study the rest of the chamber again. As he held the dagger ahead of him, Zael saw that the room stretched farther back than he had initially imagined. In the dim light, he could make out more shelves, more jars. Here, now. You're not going to leave me alone, are you? You will be fine, Humbar, says the one with the legs. Disregarding the skull's protest, Zael moved farther into Gregis Mossi's sanctum. From container after container, creatures long dead stared back at him with bulbous, unseeing eyes. A black and crimson spider, larger than his head, floated in a thick, gooey mixture. There were young sand maggots, and even a fetish, one of the sinister cannibalistic denizens of the jungle, doll-like in appearance, but with a totem mask face. They hid among the trees and thick foliage, seeking to take down the unwary by numbers. Necromancers destroyed them wherever they found the foul creatures, for nothing but evil came from them. Zael? Lad? You still alive there? I'm still here, Humbart. And so am I, but it's not like I've got so much choice in that respect. One specimen in particular caught the necromancer's attention. At first, he thought it a square sample of skin, perhaps even from one of the tentacle beasts in the jungle rivers. Yet, as he peered closely at the gray, hand-sized patch, he saw that on each corner there were three tiny but very sharp claws, and in the center what might have been a mouth of sorts. Slight bits of fur also seemed evident near the edges of the form. Curious about this oddity, Zael took the jar down, placing it on the nearest table. What's that you got there, boy? I heard glass clink. Nothing to concern yourself with. The necromancer removed the lid. Then, after locating a pair of tongs, no doubt used just for such a purpose, fished for the specimen. He pulled the bizarre creature free of the soupy liquid, letting residue drip back into the container as he used the dagger to steady it up close. I don't like to complain, boy, but are you going to investigate every damn jar? Zael glanced over his shoulder at the barely seen skull. I will not be long. A hiss suddenly arose from the container. The tongs were pulled from his hand, and something massive tried to wrap itself over the top half of his body. Zael! Zael, lad! The necromancer could not answer. A dripping, pulsating form with hide like an alligator covered his face, shoulders, and most of one arm. Zael cried out as what felt like daggers thrust into his back, tearing through his garments as if they were nothing. Teeth, jagged teeth, tore at his chest. Blatantly, he realized that he had also lost a dagger. Zael tried to speak a spell, but could barely breathe, much less talk. The force of his monstrous attacker sent both tumbling to the floor. The shock of striking the stone surface almost did Zael in, but he held on, well aware that to give in to unconsciousness would mean certain, grisly death. The hissing grew louder, more fearsome, and, so it seemed, did the monstrosity seeking to overwhelm him. Now the necromancer could feel it almost covering his body down to his hips. If the creature managed to enshroud him entirely, Zael knew well that he would be lost. With all his might, he struggled to push the moist, unsettling form up. As he did, though, the talons tore at his back, ripping through everything. The agony almost caused him to lose his grip. From without came a muffled, desperate voice of Humbart Wessel. Zael, lad, I can see a light. I think the blade by your left. Just a few inches left. Using his weight, Zael sent both his attacker and himself sliding in that direction. He felt something near his shoulder, but then the tapestry-like aura shifted, causing the necromancer to move with it. Humbart shouted something else, but whatever it was became stifled by the thick, suffocating form atop Zael. More desperate now, Zael threw himself again to the left. This time, he felt the hilt of the dagger under his shoulder blade. Half smothered in danger of being eaten, he twisted to reach it with his right hand. The teeth clamped down on his forearm with such ferocity that the necromancer screamed. Nonetheless, Zayo forced himself to continue reaching for the ivory dagger. His fingers touched the blade, and although he knew it would cause him more suffering, the injured spellcaster seized the weapon tightly by the sharp edges. Blood dripping from the cuts in his fingers, the necromancer brought the dagger up. At the same time, he muttered the quickest, surest spell of which he could think. A lance of pure bone thrust up from the dagger, flying unhindered through the thick hide of the beast, tearing flesh and soaring upward until it struck the ceiling hard. Zael's horrific bow fluttered back, a strange keening sound escaping its bizarre mouth. Ichor spilled over the necromancer as it pulled away. As he dragged himself back, Zael gave thanks to the dragon Tragowl. The lance represented one of the talons of the mystical Leviathan who served as the closest thing the followers of Rathma had for a god. Among the most effective of the necromancer's battle spells, the bone lance had been summoned twice in the past by Zael, but never under such dire circumstances. However, despite its terrible injury, the tapestry creature seemed far from dying. Moving with swift, gliding motions, it rose up to the ceiling, then over to a corner. A slight shower of life fluid spilled onto the floor below it. Are you alright, lad? The skull made a peculiar noise, like the rushing of air out of pursed lips. Thank me when you've finished off that abominable rug. Zael nodded, raising the dagger toward the heavily breathing creature. He muttered another spell. Tragowl had helped him once. Perhaps the great dragon would grant him one more boon. A shower of bony projectiles, roughly the size of the dagger, formed from the air, shooting upward with astonishing swiftness. The thing near the ceiling had no chance to move without mercy. The needle-sharp projectiles ripped through its hard hide. A rain of blood, or whatever equivalent the monster possessed, splattered the necromancer, the sanctum, and one cursing skull. Now the creature keened loud and ragged. It tried to flee, but Zael had summoned the den drag, the teeth of the dragon Tragowl, and they struck so hard that they pincushioned the struggling form to the wall and ceiling. The movements of Zael's adversary grew weaker, sporadic. The flow of life fluid slowed. At last, the monster stilled. Zael! Zael! Called Humbart. God, wipe this slime off me. Quiet, Humbart. The necromancer gasped. Summoning the aid of Tragowl twice had taken much out of him. Had he been more prepared, it would have not been so, but the initial assault by the beast had left him weakened even before the first spell. As he tried to recoup his strength, Zael eyed the vast array of specimens Gregus Monty he had collected over his life. The monster had been one small, seemingly dead sample among so many others. Did that mean that each of the sorcerer's collected rarities still had some life left in it? If so, Zael gave thanks that none of the shelves had been disturbed or their contents accidentally sent shattering on the floor. The necromancer doubted that he would have lived long, surviving in a room filled with dozens of strange and dire creatures. When his legs felt strong enough to trust, Zael returned to where the skull lay. A thick layer of yellowish ichor covered most of what remained of the late Humbart vessel. Taking the cleanest edge he could find on his cloak, the necromancer proceeded to wipe the skull as well as possible. Sometimes I wish you'd left me to rot where you found me, boy. You had already rotted away, Humbart, Zael pointed out, putting the skull on a clear part of the table. He looked around. Something on the wall to his right caught his attention. Ah. What? Not another of those beasts, is it? No. The pale figure walked to what he had noticed. Just a cloak, Humbart. Just a cloak. a cloak once worn by Gregus Matsi. Yet, it was not the garment itself that so intrigued Zael, but rather what he could find upon it. Under the light of the dagger, he carefully searched. There, with the utmost caution, the necromancer plucked 2 hairs from inside the collar region. Even better than clothing, strands of hair granted almost certain success when summoning a man's shade. You finally got what you want? Yes. These will help us call the sorcerer forth. Fine. It'll be good to see old Gregus after all this time. I hope he's looking better than I am. Surveying the chamber, Zael noticed a wide open area to the side of the entrance. As he neared, he saw that symbols had been etched into the floor there. How more appropriate and likely helpful than to summon the ghost of Gregus Matsi using the very focal point from which he had cast many of his own spells. Muttering under his breath, the necromancer knelt and began to draw new patterns on the floor. With the tip of his blade, as the point slowly drifted over the stone surface, it left in its wake the design Zael wanted. In the center of the new pattern, he placed the 2 hairs, moving carefully so as not to disturb them. Zael brought his free hand over, then, with a dagger, reopened one of the cuts he had suffered earlier. The barely sealed cut bled freely. 3 drops of crimson fell upon the hair. A greenish smoke arose wherever the blood touched the follicles. The necromancer began chanting. He uttered the name of Gregus Matsi, once, twice, and then a 3rd time. Before him, the unsettling smoke swelled, and as it did, it took on a vaguely humanoid shape. I summon thee, Gregus Matsi, Zael called in common tongue. I conjure thee. Knowledge is needed. Knowledge only you can supply. Come to meet Gregus Matsi. Let your shade walk the mortal plane a time more. Let it return to this place of your past, by that which was once a very part of your being. I summon you forth. Now the smoke stood nearly as tall as a man, and in there appeared what might have been a figure clad in robes. Zael returned to chanting words of the forgotten language, the words that only spellcasters knew in this day and age. But just as success seemed near, just as the figure began to solidify, everything went awry. The billowing smoke abruptly dwindled, shrinking and shrinking before the necromancer's startled eyes. All semblance of a humanoid form vanished. The hairs curled, burning away as if tossed with 100 flames. No! Zael breathed. He stretched a hand toward his 2 prizes, and before he could touch them, they shriveled, leaving only ash in their wake. For several seconds, he knelt there, unable to do anything but stare at his failure. Only when Humbart finally spoke did the necromancer stir and rise. So, what happened there, lad? Still eyeing the pattern in the dust that had once been hair, Zael shook his head. I don't... He stopped, suddenly looking off into the darkness. Zael? I do know why I failed now, Humbart, the necromancer responded, still staring at nothing. It never had a chance to succeed from the first. It was doomed, and I never realized it. Would you mind speaking in less mystifying statements, lad? And explain for us, mere former mortals. Zael turned, eyes wide with understanding. It's very simple, Humbart. There is one, and one reason alone. that this would make this and any summoning of Gregus Matsi a futile gesture. He still lives. "16. Zael." He tried to move loud, but could not. He tried to breathe, "Zael," but could not. "Zael, you bloody young fool. You can't die on me now, damn it." If not for his training, he would have already been dead, for his lungs completely deprived of air. The necromancer tried to talk, but although he knew his mouth was open, no sound escaped it. He tried to open his eyes, and at first they resisted. Only with arduous effort did he manage finally to raise the lids enough to see, and only then did Zael discover that he had been made like Gregus Mossy. Even with eyes well suited for the dark, Zael could only just make out enough detail to know his terrible fate. He hung from a stalactite high above the first massive chamber that he and the two mercenaries had come across on their previous journey. Like the unfortunate Mossy, Zael's arms and legs had been pinned back tightly. Unlike the sorcerer, though, Zael clearly lacked any purpose for being there. The power that had placed him there desired no sentinel, but rather merely wished the necromancer very, very dead. Zael would die too, and soon. Already, he could feel his body changing, becoming the same as the stalactite. Strange forces leached into his body, altering its structure. Given time, he would become more part of the mountain than even Gregus Mossy. But before that happened, he would suffocate. Zael, boy, you've got to still be able to hear me. Umbar Wessel's hollow voice echoed through the vast cavern, seeming to come from every direction. Straining, the necromancer managed just to make out the passage through which he and his companion had earlier entered. Somewhere within, the skull no doubt still rested, in many ways as trapped as he. His hopes, which had briefly risen, plummeted. What could the bodiless Humbar do for him? Zael's thoughts grew murkier. An immense exhaustion filled him. If you're hearing me, I'm right where you left me. Remember, you've got a sharp mind. You see it in your head? What did the skull hope to accomplish? Zael only wanted to go to sleep. Why did Humbart have to bother him? I think you're still listening, lad. Or at least, I hope so. Don't like the thought of sitting in this dank place for the rest of eternity. So hear me out. Humbart's voice irritated the necromancer. He wanted to tell the undead mercenary to go away, but without legs, Humbart could hardly do that. Your dagger. Zael, you need your dagger to help yourself. His dagger. Zael's eyes widened. Did he still have his dagger? His companion answered that quickly. I can see it, lad. It's just a few feet ahead of me. And 1,000 miles away, for all the good it would do if the necromancer could have at least seen it. He could have summoned it to him. Zael, however, had never mastered indirect summoning of objects, especially not under such dire circumstances. He had to see what he desired. The urge to sink into oblivion grew strong again. Listen to me. It's pointed toward me, with just a little bit of rock covering the tip. There's another rock, shaped like a giant's tooth, propping up the hilt area. Despite his desire to sleep, Zael listened. In his mind, a picture of the dagger began to form. He even saw Humbart's skull, the empty eye sockets staring hopefully at the blade. But why bother? You see it, don't you, lad? Damn it. You're still alive and can hear me. You've gotta see it. And finally, Zael understood. Humbart had been with Zael long enough to know the skill of the one who had animated him. He knew that the necromancer needed to see the dagger, so the skull sought to create a perfect picture for him. It would never work. Or would it? It would require what remained of the air trapped in his body, the minute particles here and there that had enabled Zael to last 4-5 times longer without breathing than a normal human man. Zael would have to squeeze his lungs completely empty in order to draw enough strength for this one spell. Meanwhile, Humbart went on with his descriptions. The skull either very optimistic about his companion's chances, or merely not wanting to think yet about the alternative. If the latter, Zael could hardly blame him, for thanks to the spell the necromancer had used, Humbart too would suffer. If someone did not find the skull, then unless the rest of the passage collapsed and shattered him, the former mercenary would be trapped in Nymyr forever, his spirit unable to move on. That's about it. Zael, lad. The skull shouted, Humbart's voice slightly more subdued. You should have a good image now. That is, if you've heard anything at all. Focusing on the dagger, Zael quickly pieced together the images as the other had described it. He saw the rocks and how the blade lay upon them. He saw again Humbart's skull staring at the partially buried tip. The necromancer visualized each variation in the rocky walls, filling out his picture. With every last iota of strength, Zael fixed on the enchanted dagger, demanding in his mind and heart that it come to him. Zael! Something gleaming flew out into the cavern as if shot from a crossbow. The trapped necromancer immediately focused on it. The object suddenly veered toward him, a beacon of light in the deathly dark. The ivory dagger flew unyieldingly toward him. For just a brief moment, Zael recalled what they had been forced to do to Gregus Masi. Should he now will the dagger to come point first? Should Zael wish the blade to sink deep into his still human flesh? But the situation with Masi had been different. Not only had the sorcerer been set into place with a purpose, but the spell had been given sentries to do its foul work. Not so with Zael. The transformation had barely begun. With the dagger to guide his work, he could still save himself. The blade suddenly dropped. Struggling, the necromancer brought it back toward him. His concentration had slipped, and worse, he felt his will ebbing. Come to me, he called in his mind. Come to me. It did, moving with such swiftness that at first it seemed it would yet slay him. Only at the last moment did the dagger suddenly veer, darting around Zael and the stalactite, forcing itself into the necromancer's encrusted hand. The moment the hilt touched, Zael found he could move his fingers. Gripping the blade, he channeled his strength into it. His lungs screamed, his heart pounded madly, but the imprisoned spellcaster would not give in. As if struck by lightning, the shell around him shattered. Weakened, Zael plunged earthward,